Philip Rivers? Really?
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Well, folks, welcome in. There's been some progress in the Bills' search for a new head coach. There's guys that have been interviewed. There are some new names that we need to discuss. And so we're going to do that here today. And there's been a lot of conversation about Josh Allen's involvement in this interview process. So I want to give some thoughts on that as well. Now, I am recording this on Sunday morning, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm pretty nervous about losing power. And so I wanted to get this recorded and published as quickly as I could, just in case Sunday and Monday are complicated for me because I don't have any power. It's like an ice storm going on right now. And so when you listen to this, there could be some new information, but if that's the case, we will capture it in Bill Squad, which will be on Monday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, live on YouTube, and then it will post as a typical podcast. And so let's get into what we know. And then, of course, this Philip Rivers thing, which is pretty fascinating. So to this point, the Bills have completed interviews as of 7:30 a.m. on Sunday morning with Joe Brady, Brian Daboll, Lou Anarumo, Anthony Lynn, and Anthony Weaver, plus Philip Rivers. We'll talk about him in a second. Grant Udinski is supposed to interview later on Sunday, and then we'll see what the Bills do concerning candidates from the conference championship games. I'm recording this before those are played, but obviously Davis Webb, Clint Kubiak, Nathan Shieldhouse, Vance Joseph, all potential candidates the Bills would want to speak with. And so we're getting a pretty good picture of where this search is going. And a new wrinkle has been added. We talked about the initial candidates, and then as the weekend approached, it was announced that the Bills would interview Philip Rivers. And they have interviewed Philip Rivers for the head coaching vacancy. So let's talk about Philip Rivers like we have the other candidates to this point. Philip Rivers is 44 years old, was a 2004 first-round pick out of NC State, played 18 seasons in the NFL, 16 with the Chargers, 2 with the Colts, threw for almost 64,000 yards, which is 8th all-time, 425 passing touchdowns, which is 6th all-time. He's an 8-time Pro Bowler, and this year he was a Hall of Fame semifinalist, but he has to restart the 5-year period because, of course, we know he went back and played this year for the Colts. As far as coaching experience, well, he doesn't have any in the college level or the professional level. He's been the head coach at St. Michael Catholic, a high school in Alabama, since 2021. So this would be very interesting. Now, one thing that is interesting about Philip Rivers right now is that, of course, he coaches his son at St. Michael Catholic, and it's his senior season upcoming. So if he were to come be the Bills head coach or part of this Bills staff, he would not coach his son during his senior season of high school football. Before we get into the pros and cons, I've had the opportunity to meet Philip Rivers. I interviewed him a few years ago in Alabama, and he came across as an awesome guy. He's never met me before, but he was gracious with his time. He was courteous with his time. He gave me a very passionate interview, and we got into the weeds with some quarterback stuff, and you could tell he just loved talking about it. And, of course, I asked him about his unorthodox throwing motion, and I loved the way he discussed it, and he was really candid and honest about the way that he threw a football, and that's how he throws a football. And We got into mechanics and into the weeds, but it was an awesome conversation. And obviously it wasn't like I've known him my whole life, but the process of getting that interview, doing the interview, after the interview, he was awesome. So what are the pros of hiring Phillip Rivers to be the head coach of the Bills? Well, let's start here. You are lying to yourself if this isn't at least a little bit interesting, right? A little crazy, of course, but it's interesting. Phillip Rivers is known for his leadership. He's a take command guy, which we saw this year with the Colts. I mean, this guy stepped in, out of nowhere. And while they didn't win any games, I think he played better than a lot of people thought. But it was how he stepped in, and it was like, oh, man, that's the Phillip Rivers that we've always watched, taking command, setting protections, doing his work at the line of scrimmage. He's a take command guy. There's no question about it. And I think he is the type of coach that I hope the Bills can bring in that's really going to push Josh Allen. I think the world of Josh Allen. I've said repeatedly, I think he's the best player in the NFL. But I think there's some truth to what Ryan Fitzpatrick has been saying about how this next head coach needs to be somebody that can come in and really push Josh and take him to an even higher level. And for there to potentially be even more accountability with Josh Allen. And I'm excited to see where this lands and if that coach is the type of guy that can really unlock even more from Josh Allen. And I also love the vantage point that Phillip Rivers would step into this opportunity with. I mean, let's be honest. He's probably a guy that feels like he's got some unfinished business in the NFL. All that success that we talked about, all those yards and touchdowns, he doesn't have a Super Bowl. He didn't even play in a Super Bowl. And, I think he could probably find quite the motivation to step in and not only get that for Josh and the Bills, but for himself. And he loves football. There's no question this man loves football. So what are the cons? Well, he's never coached higher than the high school level. It's not hard to figure that out. It would be an unprecedented move in the history of the NFL. There's some sayings out there that you reward the bold. Well, this would definitely be bold. And I can certainly appreciate the true open nature of this search. I mean, you're talking to Phillip Rivers. It looks like you're casting a pretty wide net and even thinking outside the box. And that's interesting, but it's also, if this were to materialize, pretty unprecedented. And honestly, you'd have no idea what to think of what could happen, right? It just would be really, really interesting. The other thing that might be a potential con is, how much is this just about Josh Allen? Would Phillip Rivers be interested in coaching any team? Like, is this something that he aspires to do? Is it just the opportunity that could be in Buffalo? There's a lot that goes into being an NFL head coach. Now, I do think about this quote. He was asked this year when he returned to the Colts about, quote, coaching. And this is the quote. I do think, as humbly as I can say it, that I could coach at this level. I know enough about the game and about the guys, and from a leadership standpoint, camaraderie, all that comes with it. But again, that's not something that I'm sitting here pursuing. If anything I learned the last 4 weeks, it's take it one day at a time, because there was a Sunday afternoon. I had no thought of being in Indianapolis the next day. Then 24 hours later, I was here. And so I think he's got an open mind, and, maybe certain opportunities have been presented to him recently that has inspired him to pursue them. But there's no denying that this would be unprecedented, no experience, and a little crazy. Be a little crazy. But back to what I said under the pros. You're lying if this isn't just a little bit interesting to you. And as I've tried to encourage you in this process of the Bills looking for a new head coach, keep an open mind. Just keep an open mind. Nobody's going to be right about it today or tomorrow or in a month or in a week. It's going to take time to play out. Keep an open mind. A lot of people aren't going to get their preferences, but we got to see this thing all the way through. And This is something you clearly file under interesting. All right, we got more to do, including a coach that canceled a head coach interview with the Bills. And then I want to share some thoughts about Josh Allen's involvement in this process, as that has become a huge story across the NFL. So, folks, be sure to stick with me. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to stay locked into every moment than Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where it always feels good to be right. With football season coming down to its final stretch, now's the perfect time to close it out strong. Prize Picks makes watching the game even more exciting by letting you build simple lineups around player projections. No drafts, no waiting, just football action all the way through the playoffs. Prize Picks is incredibly easy to get started. You pick 2 or more players and choose more or less on their projections. It makes watching games even more engaging, especially during the playoffs and the big game. It's a great way to keep playing fantasy football even after the season-long leagues are finished. And you're going to love the early payouts, which lets you cash out if a player gets off to a hot start. Plus, you'll love being able to mix stars from different teams and build lineups that fit how you watch the game. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood Prediction Markets. It's not you against the house, it's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood Prediction Markets changes the game. It's people moving the action, so when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You no longer are just a spectator, play-by-play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. All right, welcome back. We talked about what's happened so far. The Bills have completed interviews with Joe Brady, Brian Daboll, Lou Anarumo, Anthony Lynn, Anthony Weaver, Phillip Rivers, and then Grant Udinski is expected on Sunday. Now, one thing that's notable about that group is the Rooney Rule has been satisfied. And so the NFL demands that if you're filling a head coaching vacancy, that you must interview 2 external minority or female candidates before you can move forward with a hire. And so the Bills, with the interviews of Anthony Lynn and Anthony Weaver, have satisfied the Rooney Rule. So they are clear to move forward with hiring a head coach. Now, for all the guys they have interviewed, one guy canceled their interview with the Buffalo Bills, and it's none other than former Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel. And I have been consistent through and through that I don't want anything to do with Mike McDaniel. I am perfectly fine with that not materializing in any way, shape, or form. Mike McDaniel is a bright offensive mind. I'm not sure there are redeeming qualities beyond that. Leadership doesn't have it at all. It was a country club in Miami. Soft. Now, I give that team some credit. Like, they've had some real lulls, and they have come out of it and played hard. And, like, I don't think he ever stopped getting effort out of the players. But I don't know how you look at that time in Miami and find anything attractive about inserting that guy into your operation to be the difference maker in a team that is really good and wins playoff games but can't get to the Super Bowl and getting there. I just don't see the fit. I don't see the personality meshing well. I just thankful that he canceled that interview and that I no longer have to be concerned with this possibility. Bright offensive mind. Would be curious to see what it looks like with Josh Allen. Don't want him in charge of my football team. No, thank you. We sat there and clowned this guy for the last 4 years in Miami. Now we want him to be the head coach? Goofy. Anyways, Josh Allen is involved with these interviews. The first few were in Orchard Park. Now I understand they're down in Boca at Terry Pagula's house. And among the cast of characters at the table, quarterback Josh Allen. And this has become a huge story. And I guess I'm a little surprised by that. But there's a lot of thoughts out there. So as we consider all things right now, what are the cons? What are the pros to it? I think the con is that it blurs some lines. At the end of the day, Josh Allen's a player. And players don't pick coaches, right? That's just not what they do. They play. And so you do blur some lines here. I acknowledge that. That's about it in terms of cons. Now, it's a con if it's only about what Josh Allen wants. It's important that he has a say, not the say. So the Bills could have the wrong idea about Josh Allen's involvement. But if this is truly a collaborative effort that includes Josh Allen, great. If this is about Josh Allen running the show and getting his pick, well, then we got a problem. I don't feel like it's that. Josh Allen's a different kind of dude, right? This isn't like Trevor Lawrence sitting in on Jaguars interviews or Baker Mayfield. This is Josh freaking Allen. And I love that in some way this gives him some ownership. Now, again, shouldn't be about simply what he wants. But the parallel that I draw is listening to offensive play callers. They talk about how they like to ask their players, like, what do you want me to call? What plays do you like? On the opening script, what do you want us to include? And part of the motivation in giving that back to the players is, well, if they pick it, they have a say in it. They're going to take ownership and they'll feel very motivated for it to work. And so I love that piece of this idea of Josh shitting in on these interviews is that it's going to give him some ownership in the process. Now, of course, Josh Allen's going to work his butt off to make it work with whatever head coach the Bills hire, but maybe there's an extra layer to this, and I don't mind that. Ultimately, here's my take. As I've said, it's important that he has a say, not the say. But I do believe that this head coach hire has to be all about Josh Allen. All about Josh Allen. I had a conversation over the weekend on our Discord channel. It's an awesome community, over 2,000 Bills fans in there. We talk Bills, Sabres, stuff all day long. I impromptu went live on Saturday morning as I was taking a walk through the neighborhood and just hosted a little Q&A. We have a lot of fun in the Discord channel. But in a lot of the great conversations we've had recently, there was one about how whether or not this decision should be centered on Josh Allen versus centered around Josh Allen. And I think this should be centered on Josh Allen. Now, Josh Allen has always been elevated as a player on the Bills, especially the last several years, but also kind of came across as one of the guys, right? I think that's ultimately kind of how he wanted you to perceive him, is I'm just one of the guys here. This needs to be all about Josh Allen. If this team is going to do it, it's going to be about Josh Allen. Not Josh Allen and how he is supplemented with a run game and a defense that is opportunistic. No, it's about maximizing Josh Allen's output, which I think is the biggest failure the Bills have had over the last couple of years. How do you maximize? How do you multiply what Josh Allen provides? From a coaching perspective, from a talent perspective, from a scheme perspective, it's got to be more about 17. I'm not saying you put more on his shoulders. That's not what I'm saying. But the whole thing needs to be about optimizing his ability to produce with coaching, scheme, and players around him. Other things matter. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying neglect the defense. That's not what I'm saying at all. But this decision and how you build this thing moving forward, to me, has to be about maximizing Josh Allen. He is a force multiplier. Give him more ways to multiply that force. And as this team has become the most run-aggressive offense in the NFL, as you've seen a lack of investment at the wide receiver position, as you've seen Josh Allen kind of handpick some buddies and Ken Dorsey and Joe Brady to be offensive coordinator, and maybe there hasn't been enough accountability from those guys and how they push Josh, it's got to be all about Josh Allen. Centered on Josh Allen, not centered around Josh Allen. And so, yeah, this dude's approaching his age 30 season. Involve him in the process of picking the coach that hopefully he's with for the duration of his career that has the success that we all want it to be. I really don't see the harm in this. I think this has been an overblown story and people finding things to criticize because I just think that's what this society loves to do. All right. We got more to do. There's been some newsy stuff happening with the Bills, including a few players that have been honored, and the Bills lost a coach to a division rival. We'll talk about that here next, folks. Be sure to stick with me. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone, I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about the what I need, which is real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster, so you can spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job premium placement that it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. All right, folks, welcome back. Last segment here, I want to focus in on some newsy updates, and there's been several. We'll start with this. The Bills are losing Chris Tabor. The Bills special teams coordinator, Chris Tabor, has agreed to become the Dolphins' new special teams coordinator. And it remains to be seen how much of the current staff is retained by the new coach. But we now know that it won't include Chris Tabor, who not only leaves, but stays in the division. I thought Chris Tabor did a good job with the Bills this year. He had 3 different kickers and punters, and I thought it all landed in a good spot with Prater and Wisnowski. Obviously, Ray Davis was an all-pro kick returner, and with all due respect to Ray Davis, I think it's less about his skill set as a kick returner and more about the unique schemes that Tabor was able to introduce with the single returner and the fullback and then kind of morphing these plays into run schemes. Now, I think it slowed down for sure as the league kind of figured that out, but did enough damage for him to be an all-pro kick returner. Thought the Bills' punt coverage was good this year. I thought their kick coverage was mostly good this year. I think the black eye with the Bills' special teams was probably punt return, but that's probably less to do with Chris Tabor and more to do with not really having a punt returner. You know, things got weird with Brandon Codrington end of last year, and then they go into this year kind of giving him a chance. It doesn't really work out. It becomes Khalil Shakir, a little bit of Keon Coleman. McCole Hardman gets a few chances, but ultimately you never really had a guy. So I thought he did a good job. I think that's a good hire for Miami and potentially a loss for the Bills. Now we'll see who the Bills get to be their special teams coordinator. But Tabor to the Dolphins feels like a good move for the Dolphins. So here's what we know about the coaching staff so far. Well, it won't include Sean McDermott. It won't include Chris Tabor. And, of course, Aaron Cromer retired. So that won't be part of the mix at offensive line. So changes are here, right? This is what you do this for. You want some turnover. You want new leadership. Well, you're going to get it. Couple other items. Dalton Kincaid is replacing Travis Kelce in the Pro Bowl games. And good for Dalton Kincaid. Unfortunately, the injuries will be what we remember, but Dalton Kincaid, when he was available, was phenomenal, was absolutely phenomenal. And the splits on him this year were really special. Check this out concerning Dalton Kincaid's 2025 season. Among the 29 tight ends in the NFL with at least 49 targets, Dalton Kincaid ranked number 1 in yards per catch, number 1 in average depth of target, number 1 in yards per route run, number 1 in yards after the catch per reception, and number 1 in passer rating when targeted. The only problem is that he only had 49 targets because he was hurt. And so I'm excited for him to get healthy. Dawson Knox shared in his interview with Mitch Morse on the Monday Morning with Mitch podcast, which is terrific. You should definitely go listen to that episode. He shared that Dalton Kincaid played with a torn PCL. And we've known he had an issue with that knee, and that torn PCL obviously affects the whole leg, right? The ankle, the hamstring. And so you saw him have issues with the ankle, has some issues with the hamstring. And so get that PCL fixed and become a star. Become a star, dude, because I think he's got that kind of ability. Now, one discussion point that comes of this is, well, he's a Pro Bowler. So does that affect his fifth-year option? Because Pro Bowls do affect fifth-year options, but only if you are an original ballot selection. So this has no impact on Kincaid's fifth-year option tag, which is expected to be about $8.75 million for 2027. To me, that's an easy yes. An easy yes. I mean, that's a tick more than what good blocking tight ends get paid. So, yes, I would easily pick that up. The Bills have until like early May to make that decision. I'd be surprised if they didn't say yes to that for 2027. Josh Allen is a finalist for NFL MVP for the third time in his career. I'm not expecting him to win it this year. It certainly feels like it's between Matthew Stafford and Drake May. We'll see where Josh Allen finishes in the voting, but we know that he's top 5 this year for the third time in his NFL career. That's the only finalist the Bills have. I know some folks would point to James Cook as maybe a snub for Offensive Player of the Year. And while leading the NFL in rushing yards is huge, I think the receiving profile was missing this year. And so you have guys like Bijan Robinson and Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey who either had all three of those had significantly more yards from scrimmage. Maybe not significantly. That's probably a little unfair. Bijan comes in at 2,300. McCaffrey, 21 and some change. And then Jonathan Taylor, 1963 versus James Cook's 1912. But, Jonathan Taylor had 6 more touchdowns. And unfortunately, James Cook led the league in fumbles this year. He had 6. Derrick Henry had 4. And the next highest was 3. So I think the fumbles plus the missing receiving production plus okay touchdown production relative to some of the other guys that had more yards kind of keeps him more 6, 7, 8 in the voting as opposed to top 5 to being a finalist. And then Deion Walker was named first team all-rookie by PFWA, the Pro Football Writers Association, which is cool. I went through and with Kyle Krabs on Locked On NFL Scouting, we did our all-rookie teams. And when we got to defensive tackle, it was kind of tricky because there was several reasonable candidates, and it was cool to see Deion get that recognition amongst a pretty close group. And I'm happy for him. I really am. I think the splash plays were fun, and I'm hoping to see some development. Obviously, he's really young, and that back thing never really was an issue throughout the season. So get stronger, work on that frame, develop some better technique, continue to hone in on the nuances of the position, and hopefully this guy's a star. But thought all things considered, he had a good rookie year. There was definitely some inconsistency with run defense and taking on doubles, but when he gets to play through a single block, when he gets to work laterally, show the athleticism, his nose for the ball, get his hands up in throwing windows, Deion's a player that I think has a really bright future for the Bills, and I'm excited to see him get that recognition. All right, so there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as we kind of get caught up on the latest with the coaching search, which, of course, Phillip Rivers is a huge piece of that discussion. The Josh Allen lair, Mike McDaniel canceling, and then, of course, getting caught up on some newsy items. All right, folks, come on back. We've got Bill Squad 1:30 on Monday, and then, of course, coverage daily on all things all year long concerning the Buffalo Bills, assuming my power is good to go. But hopefully getting this thing done on Sunday morning gives me a little bit of a leash to make sure that if I lose power, it's back on and we can get back to the programming that we need here on Locked On Bills. All right, folks, thanks for being here. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills! And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.